With Minisforum's brand new eGPU dock, I'm actually running Cyberpunk 2077 at 4K with ray tracing overdrive enabled on this mini PC, and it looks absolutely amazing. What's going on, everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at Minisforum's brand new $99 Oculink eGPU dock. Now, unfortunately, this does not support Thunderbolt, but I mean, we've got the fastest connection that we can get right here with Oculink, and with all of the mini PCs and handhelds on the market that include an Oculink port, this could make sense to a lot of people out there using one of those devices. And on the channel, I've actually done a tutorial showing you how to create a cheap Oculink eGPU dock, but nothing's going to come in as nice as this one here. You can come in a bit cheaper just using a board from Amazon, but this thing is set up really nicely, and with a $99 price point, it's actually a pretty decent deal when you take a look at all the parts on the market right now. This will support up to a 3.5 slot GPU. It also supports full-size ATX power supplies and SFX power supplies. And the way this all mounts up is actually pretty ingenious. As you can see, I mean, we've got the dock, we've got a little bit of hardware and this bracket. The bracket itself actually connects to whatever power supply you're going to be using with this unit, and in turn, that's going to be our GPU bracket. Over here on this side, we've got our Oculink port. Over on the other side, we've got a power button. And of course, with a dock like this, you will have to add your own GPU and power supply. I've kind of gone through a few trying to decide exactly what to do here, but in the end, I went with kind of the most powerful card that I have, this fat boy right here, the RTX 4090. Overkill? Yes, but I really wanted to see how this thing would perform over Oculink. And when it comes to the power supply itself, again, we've got a couple different options. You can go with a full-size ATX, or you can go with an SFX, a much smaller power supply. And for this, I'm going to be going with the Cooler Master V850, so a 850 watt SFX power supply. And one of the big reasons I wanted to use this is the cables this came with are actually extra short, so it's not going to be a rat's nest of wires once I've got everything connected here. And assembly, super easy. So we're just going to place the power supply right here. And it's actually labeled, so ATX or SFX. Obviously, we're going in that SFX, just a much smaller power supply. And with this, all we're really going to need is that 24-pin motherboard connector and power to our GPU if your GPU requires it. So again, I went with this V850 because of the cabling it came with. It's super short, but it kind of makes it look like it was made specifically for this. So we don't have a ton of wires hanging off the side of this thing. I mean, you could always kind of zip tie them up, whatever you want to do with it. But something like this just makes it look really clean. And since we're going with that RTX 4090, it does require the proprietary NVIDIA 12-pin. Got one right here for it. And this bracket system, the way they've set this up, I thought was really cool. Basically, we've got this single bracket, and this will work with the SFX or the ATX power supply. We're just going to place it right in here. It's actually not going to scratch up your power supply because they've got a little rubber on it. And now we can just put our GPU right here, and that's going to be our bracket. Once it's all assembled, looks a little something like this. And yeah, I mean, we've got a massive GPU here. I wouldn't recommend going with an RTX 4090 over Oculink, but it is much faster than Thunderbolt or USB 4. Just to give you an idea, Thunderbolt 4 or USB 4 can run it up to a maximum of 40 gigs a second. When it comes to Oculink, this can run it up to 63. And in real-world performance tests that I've run, Thunderbolt 4 or USB 4 usually runs at about 31 to 32 gigs, and that's on a really good day with a good cable. On all of the Oculink eGPUs that I've tested, I've been able to get anywhere from 41 up to 58 gigs a second. That's real-world performance. So when you compare it to up to around 31, usually around 28 over USB 4, that's a big jump, and it's going to make a huge difference, especially with a much more powerful card like the RTX 4090. Not to mention that when you're connected like this, it's basically PCIe outside of the case, as opposed to, a USB-C connection, be it Thunderbolt 4. Games are more compatible with something like this. I've run into some newer games, especially something like Horizon Zero Dawn, which just doesn't like eGPUs running over Thunderbolt or USB 4, but it works perfectly fine over Oculink, even using the same exact GPU. So what I've got here is the new Minisforum MSA1 mini PC. This has Oculink, obviously, round back, and it's actually powered by an AMD Ryzen 8700G. Super small form factor with a desktop CPU. We've got that RTX 4090 connected over Oculink. Now, one thing that this dock won't do is supply power to another device because there's no USB Type-C to charge anything up. So you're going to be stuck with just Oculink. And, if you were to plug in, let's say, a handheld that had an Oculink port, You'd also need a separate power supply, but I've actually been wanting to test out this card with this mini PC, so I figured I'd go ahead and put it in this video here. But just to give you a look, we've got that AMD Ryzen 8700G, 8 cores, 16 threads, 32 gigs of DDR5. We've still got access to the Radeon 780M iGPU, but instead of using that, we've got the RTX 4090 with 24 gigs of VRAM. Now, one tool that I use whenever doing any kind of eGPUs, be it Thunderbolt or Oculink, is CUDA-Z. It's free to download, and this will kind of give you a good idea of how fast your GPU is over whatever connection you have, Thunderbolt or Oculink. And if you take a look right here, whenever I'm doing a Thunderbolt eGPU, this is sitting at about 2,800, and that's a really good connection. As you can see with this, we're up to 6,300. So we've got a much faster connection from our PC over to the eGPU, and I usually use this when I'm getting new Thunderbolt 4 cables. Not all cables are created equal, and sometimes you only see this running at around 1,600 over USB 4. Another thing I like to check here is GPU-Z. Now this isn't going to be running at PCIe X16, this is actually running at PCIe X4 4.0. Thunderbolt would be running at PCIe X4 3.0. So that's another good tool just to make sure you're getting the maximum connection over whatever connection you're using here. And the last thing I always like to take a look at is just FurMark. I want to make sure that, we're kind of maxing out this GPU. Sometimes you'll run into a connection where it's just not giving us 100% of that GPU. FurMark is actually a really good tool. So we can go ahead and open it right here. Make sure that the eGPU is selected, and we're just going to max out this resolution. I've got Afterburner up in the top left-hand corner, and you can see that this GPU is now pulling around 450 watts. Now, that's not all this GPU can pull. It can actually go much higher, but this will give you an idea of what this GPU is doing, and we are at 100% utilization, 450 watts on this RTX 4090, but this doesn't tell the whole story because while we're gaming, there's a little more going on with the GPU. So when we get into gaming at 4K on this unit, we'll probably see that wattage jump up on this external GPU. Now it's time to see how this thing performs, and we're going to start out here with some GPU benchmarks. Checking out 3D Mark Steel Nomad, we're coming in with a pretty impressive score of 9,037, and this isn't one I run much on iGPUs, so let's check out Firestrike, 46,345, and just to put this into perspective for you, I have run this benchmark on this mini PC with the built-in Radeon 780M iGPU. We're scoring a pretty respectable 8,102 when it comes to an iGPU, but yeah, this performance jump is crazy. And finally, we've got 3D Mark Time Spy, 25,616, and with just running the built-in iGPU, our Time Spy score is around 3,325. Now, there's one last thing I wanted to take a look at here, our graphics score. So over Oculink, right now with Time Spy, 32,362. And over on 3D Mark's website, they're stating that the RTX 4090 is scoring around a 36,521. We're not that far off with that 32,000, but one thing I've noticed with any kind of eGPU, USB, Thunderbolt, or Oculink is with these synthetics, they always definitely kind of score up really high. It's not real-world performance, that's why they're called synthetic benchmarks. So now we need to see how this thing handles real gaming. So first up, Cyberpunk 2077, Ultra Ray Tracing 4K, DLSS is set to auto. When we go up to that Ultra Ray Tracing, it automatically sets it there. Just to give you a look, this is pretty impressive what's going on right now, but we've got a lot more that we can get out of this because we're not even using frame gen. And if I had to guess, I'd say DLSS is really going to balanced in that auto mode. In my opinion, this is more than playable. It's actually doing much better than I thought it would. We're seeing an average of around 70 FPS, and given that we're not getting the full potential out of this RTX 4090, not bad at all, given that we're basically maxed out here at 4K. And remember, we're using that 8700G. That's actually only going up to around 65 watts in this unit right now. We could go higher, but we've got such a small form factor, it can get a little hot. So Ray Tracing Ultra is working, but what about Ray Tracing Overdrive? Now this is very taxing, even on the RTX 4090. So I suspect, with the way we've got it set up right now, yeah. So we're under 60, and I kind of expected this would happen. With VSync on, this monitor actually does support G-Sync, so we're not seeing any kind of tearing, but man, it looks absolutely amazing. This is probably the third time I've ever tried ray tracing overdrive, but we could definitely stand to use a little bit of frame generation. So we were seeing an average of around 53 without it. We'll just turn it on. It's the only thing we're going to change here. And we've almost doubled that frame rate. I mean, we're up in the 90s now. With something like this, yeah, you could definitely get by with newer AAA games. I mean, this is pretty crazy that we're using ray tracing overdrive on this little system. Now, with that RTX 4090, it does kind of make it a big system, but overall, given that we're running this over Oculink, this is some really great performance. Next up, Horizon Forbidden West, and I want to show you here, we're not using any kind of frame generation, and we're not even using DLSS. We're at a native 4K resolution, very high, so we've got everything maxed out here with this game. And this has been one of those games that just eats up systems. But with this system here, I'm seeing an average of around 91 FPS across the board, and of course, we could get a lot more out of it, enabling some DLSS, or maybe even adding some frame gen here. But we don't even need it with this RTX 4090 connected to this mini PC. It's pretty awesome. I also ran the built-in benchmark for Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. Extreme settings, no resolution scale, so we're not using DLSS. We're at a native 4K resolution. Frame gen is off. Average of 146, and our 1% low was only around 113. And finally, one of my favorite games right now. I've been playing the heck out of this. I did not play this on PlayStation 4, so going into it on PC is pretty great, especially when you can jack those settings up. And just like Horizon Forbidden West, we're not using any kind of DLSS or frame generation with this card. So yeah, overall, this new Oculink eGPU dock from Minisforum does work out really well, and what we saw in this video is overkill for a mini PC. I completely understand that. Usually I recommend something like an RTX 3060, but I'm going to go ahead and say it, with the 4000 series NVIDIA cards supporting NVIDIA's frame gen, I think the 4060 is kind of the now go-to for something like this. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you're interested in learning a little more about the Minisforum DEG1 eGPU dock, or maybe even picking one up, I'll leave the link in the description, and I'll also leave some links for some suggested power supplies on my end, and some video cards. If you really want to do this, I would suggest heading over to eBay, picking up something used, if you don't already have a video card to go into this. But that's it for this one. Like always, thanks for watching.